Well, happy Friday afternoon, Johannesburg, and good morning, California, Canada, and wherever else you are tuning in from today. I'm Harris Rosen, and I'm the co-founder of CareerPathIntelligence.com. And we are live via Zoom from Johannesburg, South Africa, with Tashmia Ismail-Saville. You can find Tash's bio on our website, and so I'm not going to spend time reading it to you. Tash is the CEO of Yes South Africa, which stands for Youth Employment Services, and they're an NGO, a non-governmental organization. And today she's going to tell you about her purpose-driven career. It's quite an incredible career. With Yes, and how she created a mask initiative for over 80,000 South Africans. And I'm sure, Tash, that that my numbers are light as at today's date, but you're going to tell us more. Not to mention that you have created many, many jobs and a gig economy. So thanks for joining me today, Tash.
Thank you for having me on the show. I'm so used to TV and radio on this webinar. Lovely to talk to your participants.
Our pleasure. So
the Youth Employment Service does exist to create jobs. That's actually what our mandate is. We're quite an exciting experiment between government, labor, and business, where the country as a whole was facing quite a crisis about 2.5 years ago. We were facing our first ratings downgrades. And of course, this triggered a meltdown amongst economic players who said, what can we do? And so 5 special purpose vehicles were built, and one of those was to address youth unemployment. So we've got a unique operational model between government and business, where we spent some time working on a policy change that would help the private sector invest in jobs. And that's how Yes was born. I was put in as its CEO and pulled from quite a mixed bag career, which started in the medical field. I'm actually a qualified dentist who practiced as a dentist for a few years, then decided to change careers, and off I went to business school, where I won a scholarship, and I figured the universe was giving me the thumbs up that I was on the right path. So I did the MBA, and then from that, the business school actually asked me to work on a European Union project on innovation networks, and that began a love affair with innovation, but innovation with a twist. I always found myself drawn to working on business models and ideas where we could take the capitalist system and the private sector's performance metrics, IP, and skills, and really drive those towards creating a more equitable society. Now, those of you that are listening from Canada, you're in the fortunate position to be in a country that has a Gini coefficient that is closer to the value of 1, which means you live in a more equal society. South Africa is one of the most unequal societies in the world. And so it's very difficult to live in a country like this, look around and have, you're almost living in a bubble where your privilege is really an elite. Is that of the elite. And there's not a day that goes by where you're not going to be confronted by what inequality looks like in your face in a country like ours. And so through the work at the business school, I started a consulting company that worked with the private sector, with executives in businesses, large multinationals. You'll recognize some of the names, like the Unilevers of this world, and worked with the executives on how we create equity in society and opportunity in society by using private sector IP and skills and knowledge. And that led me into the Yes work. This NGO work, I feel my entire life sort of prepared me to get into it. It's not easy work. purpose-driven work, particularly if you're doing it via an NGO, requires stamina, it requires resilience. You can't fall apart when someone says no, you've got to keep going. But I do think that if you work in the NGO space, it is incredibly rewarding. I don't know if I would be able to live in a country like South Africa and not be involved in this type of work. So Harris, I think that answers your question on how I found myself in this role and what motivates me. I do think you can get into NGO work from just about any undergrad. Mostly, you need to be able to think logically. You need to apply the same business principles that you would in a for-profit. I think that's how you get the best development work done. And you need to have a heart for this. You need to believe so deeply that even when things are tough and things go wrong, your purpose carries you through. So I'll stop there on the answer and request your permission to move into the presentation to talk about YES and specifically the masks. So in this picture that you see on screen, you'll see our president sitting over there with his thumb up in the air, and that was at the launch of YES in 2018. So what is this program that we call YES? It is 12-month quality experiences that we offer to Black youth, because Black youth are the most underprivileged in our country. You know, we've come out of years and years of apartheid, and of course, this has meant that large swathes of the country really live in marginalized communities. So we try to give young people their very first work opportunity. Quite often that's the difficult part. How do you break into the labor market? How do you get that first opportunity to show people what you can do? And you'll hear the same refrain from lots of youth in the country. They say, I can't get a job without experience, and I can't get experience without a job. So the idea of this 1 year of YES is, can we give young people that experience? And they emerge with a CV and a reference letter that is credible. It has the YES stamp on it. And that is what helps them get their next job. Now, this is based on data. This isn't a thumbsuck. What research has shown us is that particularly for women, the effect is pronounced. If a woman goes out into the labor market with a credible CV and reference letter, she is double the likelihood to get a job within 3 months of job search. So the program is quite powerful in putting young people into work. Now, when Harris has asked me to talk about the Masks Initiative, it may not, the power of what we're doing may not speak to you if I don't give you a sense of the South African context. When we talk inequality, this was the cover of Time magazine last year, early last year, where South Africa, this is actually a picture taken with a drone in South Africa, and we were titled the world's most unequal country. We have a Gini coefficient of 0.67. And this is a legacy of apartheid, where the government would create compounds for Black people, Blacks, Indians, and coloreds, and they would be placed in these communities away from the centers of industry, and you would need what you call a passbook that would allow you to travel to work in the factories or the mines. And of course, this sort of spatial arrangement continued even after apartheid, because this was years of oppression, and so it wasn't going to unwind in a day. But we unfortunately have not had a government that's been able to do this quickly as they should be, or as efficiently as they should be doing it. And so it just persisted, and everywhere you go across the country, you're going to get this sort of image of inequality. And in these communities, there are exceptionally high unemployment rates. 6 out of 10 people are unemployed here. Where you are born in my country matters. If you are born in a community that you see on the right-hand side of your screen, your health outcomes, your social outcomes, your income outcomes, all of them are depressed. Because when you're born with less of a chance in those communities. This just gives you, I this is my dad joke, that the economy is pear-shaped in South Africa. It's literally and figuratively pear-shaped. We have an extremely young demographic. Between the ages of 15 and 34 years, it's 35% of our population. And of course, 29% of our population are between 1 and 14 years. So we are young. But if you take a look at the economy, the participation of young people is extremely low. And this is because in South Africa, we have a very large semi-skilled and unskilled workforce. Now, if you take a look at this graph, what this shows you is GDP growth, and for the economics students there, this will be a very quick read and very easy to understand. The yellow dot that you see, the orange dot, is employment growth, and the bar is GDP growth. Now, I want you to take a look at South Africa, which we've ringed in red. South Africa has got this massive distance between GDP growth and employment growth, because we've got a very sophisticated first world sector. Particularly financial services and services. And of course, they don't grow with people. They grow with clever algorithms. They grow with AI, they grow with robotics. And so we see that semi-skilled and unskilled workers get left further and further behind, and economic growth happens without people. But the people are still there, and we've got to be able to launch them into economic participation, because every country needs taxpayers, and we have a tiny tax-paying base when you look at the size of the South African population, which is 55 million people. And why is it so difficult for people to get into the labor market and get jobs? Well, we see that 56% of our young people who are unemployed have actually not finished high school. So we don't have well-developed vocational tracks that take young people who are maybe not academically inclined and are able to stream them into vocational tracks. And so we see this extremely high number. It leaves us with this very difficult situation of having a large supply of youth, semi-skilled, unskilled youth. They are spatially distant from where the job opportunities are. And when you look at the demand side of the economy, the jobs are all sophisticated, 4IR, skilled. You need to be able to understand automation and coding. You need to be highly creative. You need to be someone not just with a straightforward undergrad, but even something a little bit more than that to be able to get into the market. We also have a very concentrated, large company type economic structure. So we don't have as many small businesses as we should have. And so these are some of the drives that we need in the economy. How do we create opportunities for semi-skilled and unskilled youth? And how do we build a more robust small business sector? Because if you look at the European Union, for example, you see that over 80% of GDP and employment is actually coming from small business. So they really are a powerhouse and motor of the economy, and we simply don't have enough of them. So yes, impact, if I can go back to yes, now that you understand the South African context and what we look like, the yes is here to try to give young people like the young woman you see on this image, to try to give them an opportunity to break into the labor market, to break into their first job by building that first work experience. And we've been pretty successful. In a country that is losing jobs on the net side, yes has been able to, this is already, I sent Harris this about a week and a half ago. The number is now 35,411 jobs is what YES has created to date, and that's in about 15 months of operation. So we're still a baby as an organization, but if you look at the impact that we've had, it's pretty powerful. Just with a policy change and some creativity and a lot of drive and purpose from my team, 35,000 jobs has put 1.4 billion Rand back into the economy, into youth wallets, where there's a very strong multiplier effect when that money is spent at local level. We've been pretty innovative in trying to get to this point. We've had a lot of innovations, but just to summarize some of our impact, we've got these 35,000 work experiences. We've got over 1,000 companies that have joined us in this 15 months. On the policy side, we've given companies BEE levels up, which is quite powerful in terms of helping those companies get contracts. We have an amazing smartphone with thousands of millions of minutes of learning on the smartphones. And what is very, very cool is a lot of our companies, there's a predisposition through the YES program to place females because female unemployment is higher. So I'm thrilled to say, as a woman who knows that women are super powerful in the workplace, that YES has 61% of people, young people placed are women. And today we had a company who had 75% placed as women, and we always applaud those. So what are these innovations that we brought into market? Well, I've made mention that we worked on a policy. Policies are really powerful in moving the private sector to contribute to equality in society. We work on really creative job creation mechanisms, and this Masks initiative that I'll share with you is one of those examples. And then on the youth side, we've got some very cool innovations. I think that we're probably leaders in digitally delivered, behaviorally based curriculum for young unemployed people. We use movies and storytelling, sort of telenovela style animations. It's really graphic rich, behavioral nudges. And every youth has a smartphone in that job, which is zero rated, which means they don't pay for any of the data. So it doesn't matter where in the country they are, one of these little townships or rural area, we're able to communicate and train those youth over their phones. So to summarize, what we do is we're about new places, new spaces, new faces, new industries, and new career pathways in which we can create youth jobs. We do this via local value chains, infrastructure like you see in this picture, where we bring to township or low-income communities a range of job opportunities. So if you take a look at this picture, you'll see that we've got youth in hydroponics, doing hydroponic farming, exporting this beautiful produce out of these low-income townships, giving them the factors of production to export outside of the township and into higher value add organizations and buyers. In the center picture over here, what you see is a young woman who's making sanitary pads, and she's doing this in a township. And these are young women off the street that were trained to get into this manufacturing process. You see training going on, you see chefing going on. And this is an example of our smartphone. The smartphone gives youth the ability to get paid and transact digitally. It gives them a digital address so that they can communicate. It really gives them 4IR tools so that they're able to integrate into society. It's difficult for me to explain when you come from a country like Canada, where so much works, where there's so much access. It's very difficult to put you into the mindset of a young person who really wakes up every day and has very little choice. You wake up and you don't even have enough money to create and photocopy a CV. So if we can give youth these smartphones, and if we're able to connect them digitally into this big wide world of opportunity, if we can teach them to transact, to be able to get micro credentials and train themselves online, we really can shift their mindset around the possibilities that they can open up for themselves and really change that locus of control to an internal locus and a growth mindset of what they can really do. So these smartphones are an incredibly, incredibly powerful tool in the hands of young people in developing nations. We have youth across a whole range of sectors, the orange economy, the green economy, the blue economy. It's a lovely new model that creates aspiration in jobs. We have young people in the lavender economy, which is about caring and helping, where young people in rural communities go door to door and do primary health care, teaching homes about nutrition and hygiene, getting them tested for HIV and TB. We have youth in recycling programs, removing non-indigenous plants, planting indigenous. In the oceans economy and the green economy, they're beautiful jobs. We have youth in creative, cultural, and leisure, learning how to be game rangers, learning how to protect the environment, anti-poaching programs. And we have youth learning how to farm, making farming sexy again for young people, that it's not about standing in a dry field waiting and praying for rain, but that you can really use technology to completely change the outcomes of something like agriculture, which is a really old industry, but we can see renewal of it with young people employing technologies. And that takes us into our masks initiative. And Harris was completely correct in saying to you, the numbers on this slide are already dated. I sent them about a week and a half ago. We have now, in this drive to look for new places and new spaces for jobs creation, with the advent of COVID, which has impacted all of us across the world quite dramatically, we saw that there was going to be a massive issue with lockdown. Livelihoods inside of those township communities that I showed you the picture of are incredibly precarious. Incomes are precarious. And when government pronounced a lockdown for middle-class people like me in my home, with a golf course outside and an income, lockdown was pretty easy. You know, we haven't felt it in the same way that a person living in a shack, dependent on an income of one breadwinner to 6 or 7 people, would feel it. And so my team's immediate reaction was, what were some of the ways we could immediately start to work with township entrepreneurs and young people to get incomes and jobs going into those communities when lockdown was going to cut off lifelines to households. And so we thought, well, everybody's going to need masks. Quite early on, we started to see the data on how masks can reduce infection rates. And so we started to work with a wide network of our partners in township communities, entrepreneurs, and we started to standardize fabrics, designs for comfort, for cost, for breathability, and started to work with partners like Uber you see here. Uber were one of the first companies to lobby government to allow for deliveries. And so Uber was one of the first in lockdown to get their drivers back out onto the road. And so Uber worked with Yes and ordered 20,000 masks. It was one of our first orders. A hospital group placed with us, Netcare, it's a big chain of hospitals. And what we were able to do is, by clustering these fragmented tiny businesses together on a platform, so copying Uber, we clustered them all together on a platform, and we started to help them with the standardization, with the quality, with the fabric inputs. And my team started to get them to aggregate product so that we could do massive orders. And our order book is now on over 117,000 masks. This is in less than 5 weeks. We've been able to open opportunities for 117,000 masks. This is close to R1 million in these 5 weeks that goes to people like you see in this picture, these young people who did activations at malls, at Uber drop-off points to get these masks out. We've now had a very big bank place an order with us. In this next picture, what you'll see is Saatchi. I'm sure you all know the marketing agency. Saatchi ordered masks. They sent care packages out to their staff at their homes, and there was a Yes mask popped into that basket. So lovely PR for us when a marketing agency uses the Yes masks. And these are some pictures of the amazing young people who really have a strong desire just to work hard and be able to get that market access, that there's some opportunity for them to be able to sell the product. Because a lot of times it's all about networks and who you know. And these small entrepreneurs, even if they've got beautiful product, just don't have the networks to be able to connect themselves into big buyers. And even if they were able to get hold of someone at Uber, on their own, they would never be able to make the volumes that would be required for a big order. But by aggregating through this platform that Yes has created, we're able to allow these guys to participate in the bigger economy. So again, the slide is dated. We have about 272 businesses in market that we're assisting, that these incomes are going to. We now are over R1 million in incomes back to these businesses, and 117,000 masks. And here's some beautiful images of these entrepreneurs, designers and seamstresses across the country, cutting, sewing, packing. And a very exciting story that I will end with, which we're super proud of, is that our team have secured an order with a Brussels-based agency. It's an old BASF contacts that BASF is a German firm, and they've placed an order for masks for the EU. The order left South Africa today by DHL and will arrive in the EU next week. And our little township entrepreneurs that you see in these pictures have become exporters, and they are bringing Forex into the country and helping with our balance of payments, which is a very exciting story for us. Nothing develops and grows small businesses like an export market. So we are incredibly excited to be selling these masks abroad, and they're beautiful quality. They meet all of the hygiene standards, all of the health standards. They're triple layered masks, but also made in stunning South African fabrics and designs. And I will end with that very happy story on our township entrepreneurs.
Fabulous. Thanks, Tash. That was fabulous. We have a few questions. The first question is whether or not you feel that the color scheme, this is very interesting. We in the West and elsewhere really have discerned between what we've traditionally called blue collar and white collar positions. So how do you feel this color scheme, that's a very interesting way, I surmise, of destigmatizing work and the importance of everyone's work. You want to comment on that?
Color schemes. What do you mean by color schemes?
Well, blue, orange, you mentioned a color scheme.
The rainbow economy.
The green economy, the rainbow economy.
Absolutely, that's such a great question. That model has come from a researcher at the HSRC, Human Research Sciences Council, based on exactly what their research showed, is that when you look at semi-skilled and unskilled laborers, not going to university is seen as a poverty marker. And taking jobs that are outside of the whole university graduate space was seen as less. You hadn't made it. But if we start to change the labeling on these jobs, if we look at them via a lens of colors, we believe that we can really build an aspiration around a green economy job or an orange economy job, where it's not this dichotomy of skilled versus unskilled. So that is precisely the reason for the color, for naming these jobs by rainbow colors, is to destigmatize, but also build pathways within each of those industries for youth to be able to micro-credential themselves from an unskilled position right through to a highly skilled position. Because there are programs, training programs, which youth can access online that can start to take them on that pathway of educating themselves.
This is critical, isn't it? Because in places like Switzerland, you have streaming, you have approximately 80% of all students, for all of you students out there, are streamed into vocational jobs. I believe with much less stigma attached to those jobs, and only 20% being streamed into universities. So this rainbow economy really caught my attention. Just an eye-opener, as did the, you really highlighted the disparities in South Africa very well. And, to say that this is a challenge for you and your organization is an understatement. But what will the future of skilled jobs. This wasn't my question. A student has asked, what does the future of skilled jobs look like for South Africans? And what will they look like in 5 years, in 10 years? What's the economy going to look like?
Mm. Look, at the moment, I have to say our economy is still very, it's two economies. You can't talk about one South African economy. The first economy, which is sophisticated businesses and which are our global banks and multinationals, are going to continue on this trajectory, which is the global trend of automation, robotics, AI. There's no stopping progress. But we do need to have dedicated, structured strategies to start to pathway those same youth that I described in this presentation, those millions of young people who cannot be part of that economy because they don't have the training to be there. Now 4IR is quite interesting because at the same time that it is disintermediating large numbers of people, it's also giving us our most potent opportunity and tool to upskill youth from these communities where they've been historically locked out. So by making online training available, by making VR training is going to be hugely powerful. If you can't sit in a submarine and learn how to operate it because the infrastructure is too expensive to train you on a real submarine, the idea of VR training is going to be really powerful in making education and training a lot more accessible, and especially in this vocational space. I was at Sasol, which is one of our big engineering and oil companies. And at one of their training facilities, I put on these big goggles and I had the equipment and I was learning how to weld on, it wasn't a VR machine, but I was getting the full welding experience digitally with the same feel and weight and heft of the equipment. It was very exciting to see how technology can change the way that second economy of South Africa could potentially develop. But it's not going to happen if we don't put programs like this in place.
Thank you, Tash. And we had a comment from somebody about the disparity among women and men. And maybe you can comment, and the comment is this, that promoting women in the workforce is so important to the success of a society. And that's so true. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about the work of YES and how it is purpose-driven toward that end.
So we engage with our partner companies quite intensively. The moment you start to make people aware of the disparities, you change the way they respond to disparities. And so by continuously highlighting to our partner companies that female unemployment is higher, that women, there's a lot of literature that tells you how powerful teams are with added numbers of women, and boards, how well-performing boards with women are. By making this kind of data available to our companies, we're finding that it subconsciously is influencing them to increase the number of women that they hire. If you ignore the problem, if you don't highlight it and don't make people aware, the behavior will continue.
That's a great answer. I mean, this is going to take a lot of time, isn't it? These institutionalized biases exist everywhere. And so I'm sure you have an uphill battle. But first of all, great presentation. And we have a lot of comments coming in about careers. A lot of young people who feel they have 2 feet in the air, if you will, not just in South Africa, where youth unemployment is rampant and there is obvious disparity. But we have a question from someone. Will YES customize the career path based on your resource pool? So that's a good question. How does an NGO work with candidates to create a gig economy? You've created what a great gig economy you've created in the wake of COVID-19. Everybody gets that. I might add that these masks are beautiful. They're stylish. They're not merely functional. They're stylish too. But maybe you can comment on that. How do you skills match?
So we try not to do everything. I mentioned in the talk that we have an Uber style platform. So if you take a look at the picture, this Yes Hub in the presentation picture, you'll notice the number of brands we have that have contributed to this. So Microsoft, for example, Microsoft, Cisco, Google are all partners. So when we look at the digital space, we have a whole range of partners that are offering their programs, and we try to get these programs free for youth. So we don't have to find all of the funding, we just have to find the right partners, and we have to pool those partners together. And that is the beauty of this model. There is a screening tool that we use. It's a game called NAC. And this game allows you to profile youth through a series of games that you can play on the app. You can get that off the App Store. We do use that as a screening tool to make sure that when youth enter our ecosystem, that they're going into a pathway that's matched to their underlying skills and abilities. But also our partner companies who give these youth jobs are also doing the screening work and filtering work. But it's a great question, because when the screening and filtering isn't done well, when youth are placed into an opportunity that doesn't match well with their natural skills and abilities, you find that there are very high drop-off rates. And I don't think that anybody's gotten this 100% right yet, because a lot of the psychometrics and streaming tools are quite expensive, and they require strong English literacy to be able to do most of them. So the NAC game is pretty exciting in that it's game-based and your English literacy doesn't play too much of a role. But I still think there's a lot of work to do globally on how we figure out what the right career path is for young people.
Tash, we have another question in that is very dear to me. I'm a government accountability lawyer by training in the higher ed space. So I'm always watching, and thank you, by the way, for, I'm a proud Canadian, and thank you for being so laudatory toward Canadians and our government. And I generally agree with you, but, there's a question about the South African government and how supportive they have been. You've highlighted your partnerships with industry, which are absolutely vital, right? That those partnerships between NGOs and industry, I get that you couldn't do this without those partnerships. But what about the government? How supportive has the government been? I mean, do they recognize the depths of the problems, the hurdles that you're confronted with every day?
Yeah, I think anybody that's worked in youth employment and government, for government, you can imagine this is a massive preoccupation. The youth unemployment number is one of the largest in the world. There's no one government. It depends what department in government you're dealing with, who the personalities in that government are. But I do have to say that this policy change that the Department of Trade and Industry worked with us on is pretty progressive. It was data-led. We worked private sector. My team worked with them for a year and a half on looking at the implications. And it was a private sector-led policy change that made them create a law that allowed companies to receive an incentive, a benefit for investing in youth employment. So just based on that alone, I would argue that our 35,000 jobs would not have happened without that policy change. So in terms of working with us on that, I'm not going to comment on government in all spheres, because there's some departments in government that do an horrific job, that are really not servicing and committing to citizens in the way that they should. But the particular team that we've worked on for this policy change, I think, have been really progressive. and we have a good relationship with them. So in this sphere, I think we've done pretty well.
It's amazing what you've done. And, you know, somebody else commented, another comment came in about your numbers. You know, the math tells a story here. You've really changed a lot of lives, and you should be lauded for that. I have a question of my own, which relates to the 40 plus and 50 plus segments. You know, in the West, not just in Canada and the United States, Tash, but in countries like Japan and Germany, you have an aging workforce. One great thing, based on the little that I know about Africa as a continent, is that it's a much younger workforce. But is there an issue with retraining and reskilling people, as opposed to training and skilling them, you know, from cradle, I won't say cradle to grave, I'll say from cradle to, you know, into their 20s, right? So is there that retraining, reskilling issue in South Africa?
Where I think that the reskilling issue is really important is on an entrepreneurship track. I don't think that many of our undergrad programs or school programs or vocational programs do nearly enough to give people the tools they need to start their own businesses and to think about what it takes to start your own business. So if there, I mean, look, our basically a lot of our program, we've got some high quality universities, but our vocational schools and our public schools, private schools are also world class. But our public schools and vocational schools are really, you know, miles behind where they should be in terms of curriculum development. But outside of just the professional curriculum development, the idea of getting people to use critical analysis, critical thinking, problem-solving skills, and what you need to build the resilience of an entrepreneur and some of the basic financial literacy that you need as an entrepreneur. A lot of that needs to be built into the population. And I think people who are going to be reskilled that need to move out of the workforce and back in again, those are the same sorts of training that you want to give them. You want to be able to make them able to follow an entrepreneurship track if they're going to be losing or being disintermediated out of their job in the private sector.
I'll piggyback on your comment. We have, interestingly enough, we have John Warner joining us from Los Angeles on June 3rd. And, you know, he runs an incubator dedicated to the 40 plus and 50 plus segments. And I recognize, based on what you've said, that segment may be ancillary or peripheral to what you're focused on, which is youth unemployment specifically. But magical things happen, don't they, when you see public-private partnerships really gel, and when you see industry really try to solve the problem, right? And I think this is what I hear you saying. And it's so true, and it's no less true in the 40 plus and 50 plus segment, you know, in the West and many OECD countries. We have another great question here, and that is whether or not YES suggests, this is an issue of a question of process, I think, whether or not YES will suggest that a candidate find a job first, or will you effectively act as a search agency for that candidate based on their skill set?
So the biggest issue in South Africa is not recruitment agencies that will place youth into a job. We have a lot of recruitment agencies. The biggest problem in our country is new jobs, just creating places for young people to work. So most of our time is spent on working on projects like the Masks Initiative that I've shown you. What you see in these pictures, these jobs in in townships, in hydroponics and aquaponics and sanitary pad production, and in the tourism and leisure industry. So a lot of what we're trying to do is open up the types of jobs that you see in these pictures. And there are a lot of bodies in the country that will find youth and place them into that job. That's not really the economic issue that we have.
Another question that just came in, what makes one region better than another from the standpoint of job creation?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, it's like most cities in the world is people will migrate from rural areas to cities because money, capital, perceived opportunities are in urban areas. So we're no exception to this massive rural urban migration. The other thing about South Africa is on the continent, we're seen as one of the bright spots where there is infrastructure and money. If you come into our country, our constitution guarantees that if you get sick, our hospitals will see you. And so we have a massive number of economic migrants from across the continent, and even coming to us from Bangladesh and Pakistan and India and China. So South Africa has a big migrant situation. A lot of economic migrants, though, try to get into work, but it's not always legal work. So yeah, it's quite a mixed pot over here of the types of jobs and the types of people in our system.
So Tash,
I think I may have gone off topic from that question.
Not at all, not at all. I think you've answered it, but I am going to piggyback on the student's question and your comments. And my question, the question that arises in my mind is, how do neighboring countries, proximity to other countries, affect South Africa's job market? And by example, because you've lived in Canada, Canada and the US, Canada exports 75% of its goods and services to the United States, right? I mean, and that has a material impact on the economy and the job market. So how do neighboring countries within the continent of Africa impact the youth unemployment economy and the economy at large in South Africa?
That's such a great question. And it's complex. It's not easy to answer. I mean, having a wealthy neighbor like the US is a fantastic thing to have. You want to have neighboring countries that you can sell your product to because it increases your market size so dramatically. So what we have in South Africa is not neighboring countries that are increasing our market size. They're increasing the number of job seekers that come into the country. And unlike Canada, which has a really well-designed immigration policy, it very cleverly weights, and there's a dynamic system of we need school teachers. And so, there's an ability to weight and score people coming in to say, give school teachers a higher score or give medical personnel a higher score. It's very controlled. South Africa's borders are not controlled. So we get highly skilled immigrants coming in, and they try to come in legally and of course get stuck in the absolute morass of administration at Home Affairs. And then you get someone who'll walk across the border illegally and will take a job in South Africa illegally. And of course, we have really strict labor laws in the country. And we have a minimum wage. And if you're an illegal immigrant, you're not going to work at minimum wage. You'll work for whatever you can get. So it does create, I feel that migrant populations bring a whole lot of energy and diversity into an economy. But in South Africa, it becomes quite complex because we have so many illegal migrants coming in. And it does create a lot of tension in low-income communities. We've had xenophobic attacks because locals feel that migrants are taking their jobs. And of course, when you've got such high unemployment rates, it just really does exacerbate the situation. So unlike having the US as a neighbor, where you've got a bigger market, we've got people flooding across our borders who are looking for a better life and looking for opportunity.
What you're saying is very interesting, because Canada has seemingly the opposite problem. You know, we take in some 400,000 immigrants. I shouldn't say immigrants, that's not true, international students. 400,000, which is about 1% of the Canadian population. And we are dependent on those young people, hoping that they will come to Canada, study in Canada, pay rent, buy food, and emigrate to the country. Mainly because Canada is a demographically a country with an aging workforce, as I've said. So it's interesting to hear the contrast between you know, South Africa's issue and Canada's. I surmise that in the wake of COVID, you know, it's going to be, to say that it's going to be challenging for Canada and the United States to attract international students, you know, in 2000 is a gross understatement, and it's a crisis, in fact, economically for Canada. But on that note, I want to ask you another question that came in. A student has asked about COVID, and obviously the mask initiative relates directly to COVID-19, but how has COVID-19 impacted on what you are doing as an NGO? It's a broad question.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lovely article in The Economist that came out, I think it's the April 26th edition. And there are examples of companies that have really used the pandemic to stimulate incredible innovation. And I think it's had a similar impact on YES, in that we sort of imagined the fallout and started not just the masks initiative, but we've started an e-commerce platform. We've created a brain trust to come up with new disruptive models. But there's no doubt that on our central model, so it stimulated innovation, absolutely. But on our central model, you know, if companies that we are depending on to create these jobs have been hit by lockdown, it's more the lockdown than the actual, you know, spread of the virus. The lockdown is what has shut businesses off, that is destroyed incomes. And when you've got fragile small businesses, they cannot survive. You know, they live hand to mouth. You know, they use what they make in a week to buy stock for the next week. I'm talking about little restaurants, for example, and to pay their workers. There's no buffer. And so when government shuts down the economy for the length of time that it has, those businesses are not going to survive. So it's just made our job a whole lot bigger, because post this crisis, we are imagining that our youth unemployment rate is going to go well over 50%. You imagine that number. Developed countries cannot imagine the kind of number that we talk about. It almost seems surreal to them, you know, that you could have over 50% of young people between the ages of 18 and 35 not in employment. And already in some of our rural areas, we've had unemployment rates of 73%, female unemployment rates in some areas. You can imagine what it's going to be like for those communities that have already been on the wrong side of that number.
Those are just staggering numbers, indeed. And, you know, when you look at what has happened in Canada and the United States is experiencing, I think the latest numbers that I saw were 40 million within the ranks of the unemployed in a country of 330 million people. And that's a crisis. So certainly a 50% rate of unemployment, aside from creating this reserve army of labor, which is both healthy and unhealthy, but generally far more unhealthy, right? Given the numbers. I mean, you know, it leads me to another question, Tash, based on what you're saying. And that is there an opportunity for an export economy? You know, you have obviously the ability, you have cheap wages, but you don't want to have exploitative wages, and you want people to have dignity. Is there an opportunity for an export economy, and what would that look like?
Well, that's why this masks initiative was so exciting for us, that we were able to do this first export order. South Africa does export, but largely we export minerals, you know, and there's been a long standing economic debate in the country around how do we drive a bigger export market. But our labor laws have decimated many industries. Our manufacturing industry has been contracting year on year, and a lot of it is because of labor issues. It's because of making it very difficult to hire and fire, making it very difficult for smaller businesses that have to abide by wage rates that are set at an industry level. For bigger businesses, and smaller businesses have to comply. There's also a huge amount of red tape around setting up a business. So we've got to do a lot of work internally to make it easier for businesses to trade and operate. But the fact that COVID dropped our exchange rate in the way that it has, you know, these masks that we're making for the Belgians, in euros, this is nothing for them. And the exchange rate gives us a huge opportunity to be able to export at a better price. So it's about, you know, making sure that we do things right in the country with policymakers and government that make it easier for us to trade. Because if that doesn't happen first, it's difficult to take care of the export, difficult to participate in the export market. But there is absolutely opportunity. You know, you said these masks are beautiful. They're made in the shwe fabric, which is 100% cotton, but has the most beautiful, vibrant prints. And it doesn't matter where in the world you wear them, you know, people are going to look at them and know that's something special. So I think that there are some indigenous designs, some beautiful local craft that you see. There's a very creative and artistic streak in these in township communities. So I do think there's room for us to really explore sending out a lot more in this export market, especially given our exchange rate.
That's incredible. It sounds like you also have this growing plant-based and vegan segment too. If you can work among, you know, public-private partnerships and figure out how to efficiently export those products from South Africa. Tash,
Yeah.
I want to thank you. This has been incredibly insightful. I always learn from these sessions, and I want to thank you for an insightful presentation, both on your own purpose-driven career and for educating students within South Africa. For those who missed the session, it will be re-aired on our YouTube channel. And I want to thank you all for listening in today. So until next time, everybody, stay safe. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
Thank you.